You have entered the 21st century dystopian portal. Welcome to confusion, welcome to question, and welcome to clarity. The life is in the blood.
There are bones in the soil of this world that do not belong to men. Long bones, too long, sleeping in the bellies of mounds that rise like graves for another species. Farmers once uncovered them by accident in North America. Surveyors measured them in disbelief. Then the bones disappeared. In 1848, a young congressman named Abraham Lincoln stood before the roaring cataract of Niagara and wrote words that history still struggles to digest. The eyes of that species of extinct giants, whose bones fill the mounds of America, have gazed on Niagara as ours do now. Lincoln did not mean metaphor. He meant lineage, that the land itself had been inherited from beings who walked before us, beings that our museums no longer acknowledge, but whose shadows reach into every myth humanity has ever told. Later, John Wesley Powell, the soldier scientist who charted the Grand Canyon, wrote briefly of an ancient and more powerful race preceding the Red Man. Then, as if corrected by some unseen hand, he recanted. Powell's words vanished from circulation, and a silence, cold and bureaucratic, spread across the archaeological world. Yet the rumors persisted. In the old reports in regional newspapers of the 1800s, skeletons taller than 9 feet were uncovered from the Mississippi Valley to the Ohio plains. Skulls with double rows of teeth, hands with 6 digits that could crush a stone. Were they human, or something that wore humanity as a disguise? The scriptures whisper of them, the Nephilim, born of divine rebellion, half spirit, half flesh. They were not God's creation, but fallen angels' temptations made manifest. The Book of Enoch describes them as beings who consumed the life of the earth, devouring its creatures and each other until their cries reached heaven itself. And the flood, the cataclysm we call divine mercy, was sent to erase them. But destruction rarely completes itself. Some fled east, others west. And the western ones, it is said, followed a great fleet, a nation of traders known as the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were builders, mariners, mathematicians, the first to harness the alphabet, the first to map by the stars. Their ships were swift, their motives mercantile, but their knowledge uncanny. Copper from the Great Lakes bears the signatures of their metallurgy, though we pretend not to see it. Artifacts have surfaced in Kentucky, Alabama, even Arizona, inscribed with symbols that match the coastal cities of Tyre and Sidon. And in the Grand Canyon, there are chambers sealed beneath federal fencing, halls said to contain tablets, statues, and remains unlike any known Egyptian or Babylonian kind, at least, if you believe the stories. The site, long restricted to researchers, is cataloged nowhere public. Locals speak of government men arriving unannounced, removing stone crates beneath floodlights. Who were they protecting? Us, or the past itself? The Phoenicians, according to legend, trafficked not just in metals, but also in blood. Among them, some say, were giants, taller than any sailor, silent, powerful, perhaps fugitives of the flood, or something else that came again afterwards. Perhaps they were the offspring of those who swore they would never kneel again before heaven. Modern scholars of forbidden history suggest that the Nephilim hid among the Phoenicians, using them as hosts, as vessels. It would explain the artifacts that should not exist, the cross-cultural symbols of the bull, the open palm, the horned crown. In Sardinia, locals still speak of giant tombs under their breath, tumba di giganti, sealed by the authorities. When men dug too deep, the ground was closed forever. The bones were taken. The truth was removed under the pretext of preservation. The story did not end in Canaan. The Israelites were told to destroy them, every man, woman, and child of their kind. But the command, brutal as it was not genocide. It was surgery, a cutting away of corruption, of a hybrid race, not completely mankind. The giants were not a tribe, they were a disease. The DNA diluted through the ages diminished their stature, but not their appetite. Those who survived bred with humankind. They became kings, shamans, warlords. They built civilizations that rose quickly and fell violently, always leaving behind a trail of bones too large to fit our history books. By the time they reached the Americas, they had learned to hide. In Nevada, there is a cave near Lovelock where the Paiute tell of a final battle. Their ancestors cornered a tribe of red-haired giants who had been hunting them, eating them, and set the cave ablaze. When it was excavated in 1911, archaeologists found a layer of ash, weapons, and bones of unusual size. Then the remains were taken away, lost, mislabeled, or hidden. Farther south, in Chaco Canyon, the Anasazi vanished amid evidence of ritual cannibalism and mass grave sites. Petroglyphs in the sandstone depict beings with 6 fingers, polydactyly, the ancient genetic mark of the Nephilim. To the natives, these were monsters. These were gods of the old times. To modern science, they are an anomaly, or something completely made up. To the old texts, a curse reborn. The Phoenicians could disassemble their ships, carry them overland and rebuild them on inland waters, a craft none have replicated since. Their artisans were masons in the truest sense, masters of geometry, of stone, of proportion. From their guilds, the myth of Hiram Abiff emerges, the builder king of Tyre, hired by Solomon himself to raise the first temple. His secrets became the heart of Freemasonry, his lineage the shadow behind the very idea of the master builder. But remember, their knowledge came first from the Watchers, the same fallen ones who corrupted Eden's children with forbidden art. What we call phonics, philosophy, physics, all share a root older than language, older than the fall of Babel. It was the knowledge that first tempted man to believe he could be as God. The Phoenicians worshipped Baal and Moloch. They offered their firstborn to the fire, the same ritual practiced by the ancient giants before them. When Hannibal of Carthage nearly destroyed Rome, he was hailed as a genius of strategy. Few remembered that his ancestors once ruled the earth not by wisdom, but by terror. His victories were echoes of something primordial. He was Phoenician. When we unearth the remains, we are not rediscovering glory. We are uncovering rebellion, the residue of a creation that defied its maker. The story of the giants is not merely the story of a vanished race. It is the story of humanity's near extinction at the hands of those who refused heaven's order. The flood buried them, but they returned. The prophets warned of their return, and still the bones rise, unearthed, denied, sealed again. The ground does not lie. It keeps the memory of every trespass, and beneath the mounds of America, that memory stirs. A story older than the Bible presents itself. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the survivor's lament. When the waters withdrew and the clay of the world still bled, a single tale remained carved into black stone. The Epic of Gilgamesh. Its tablets were found in Nineveh's ruins, their edges melted by fire, their words older than Abraham, older than the alphabet itself. Yet behind its poetry lingers a tremor of fear, the story of a being who should not have lived through the flood, and yet did. Gilgamesh ruled Uruk, 2/3 divine, 1/3 human. That fraction alone betrays him, for no mortal lineage is measured in thirds. Only the offspring of watchers and women carried blood that defied arithmetic. His strength was unnatural, his restlessness unending. He moved through the world like a remnant of a condemned race, a Nephilim who had slipped through the judgment meant to erase his kind. Uruk's people feared him. He took what he wished. He crushed all contests and filled the streets with labor that glorified himself. He built walls higher than need required, as though afraid the sea might come again. The elders prayed that the gods would balance his tyranny, so the wild man, Enkidu, was shaped from clay and breath, a mirror of the old creation, half beast, half spirit, to contend with the giant. When they wrestled, the earth shook. When they embraced as brothers, it was as if two surviving bloodlines had recognized one another. In the 7th tablet, Gilgamesh seeks Utnapishtim, the man who outlived the deluge. He crosses oceans and deserts to ask how a mortal could survive divine wrath. But what if he went not as a pilgrim of mortality, but as one who remembered the flood from the other side? For him, the story was not myth, it was trauma. He asked not, "How did you survive?" but "How did we perish?" Utnapishtim told of the ark, the chosen family, the sealed pitch hull while the gods wept as they beheld the flood. Gilgamesh listened, but he did not weep. Perhaps he already knew. When he finds the plant that restores youth, a serpent steals it, a detail scholars treat as allegory. But in the older memory it reads like justice. The same blood that had corrupted Eden would not be allowed to taste renewal. The serpent, instrument of reversal, took back what was never meant for the hybrid king. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk empty-handed, his divine portion eroding into mortality. Scribes later crowned him hero. Yet every line betrays melancholy, guilt, remembrance of judgment. He builds his city walls, marks his name in stone, and commands future men to read it. The command sounds less like pride than confession. See what we built, and remember what we lost. In the chronology of myth, Gilgamesh stands between worlds. After the cleansing, before the forgetting, he is the echo of the Nephilim, the proof that one strand of forbidden flesh endured the waters. His epic is less a celebration than a survival log, the oldest evidence that the deluge did not erase all that heaven sought to destroy. To the modern archaeologist, the tablets are literature. To the theologian, they are heresy. To the chronicler, they are a wound. For if Gilgamesh truly lived, if his strength and lineage were as written, then at least one of the giants outlived the flood and built a kingdom on its drying mud. From there, the contagion of their knowledge spread again, through Sumer to Akkad, to Babylon, to Tyre, to the ships that later crossed the western sea. Each empire, a paler reflection of that first defiance. Each ruler, another echo of a king who once sought immortality and found only memory. The Choctaw, a native North American tribe, have a story of the deluge. They say our people have always had a tradition of the flood, which happened in this way. There was total darkness for a great time over the whole of the earth. The Choctaw mystery men looked out for daylight for a long time, until at last they despaired of ever seeing it, and the whole nation was very unhappy. At last a light was discovered in the north, and there was great rejoicing until it was found to be great mountains of water rolling on, which destroyed them all, except a few families who had expected it and built a great raft on which they were saved. The Creek Natchez people say the dog warned his master to build a raft because all these things were about to be destroyed by a flood. The waters rose, lifting man and dog above the clouds into a wonderful land of trees. The dog told the man that the only way he could ever return to his homeland was if he, the dog, were thrown into the water. The man was loyal to his friend, and he was reluctant to do this. The dog also told the man not to leave the raft for 7 days after the waters had subsided. With pain in his heart, the man threw the dog overboard. As the dog had predicted, the waters did subside, and the man waited 7 days as he was instructed. At the end of the 7 days, multitudes of people approached the raft, some wet and dressed in rags, and others were dressed in finery. When they arrived at the raft, it was clear that they were not humans, but spirits of the many killed in the flood. The Mojave Apache people also have a story. That many years ago, people lived under the ground, and there came a time when there was no food, when the people sent a hummingbird up to see what he could find for them to eat. He saw the deep roots of a grapevine, which he followed up to the surface of the earth. The people went up through the hole and began living above ground. One day a man looked down into the hole made by the vine, through which the people had entered the upper world, and saw that water was rising up through it. The wise ones knew that a great flood was coming, and that something had to be done to save humankind. They then cut down a great tree and hollowed it out to make a canoe, placing a girl in it, a young girl. The tree trunk canoe floated high on the waters until nothing but water could be seen in any direction. The wise ones had warned the girl not to leave the vessel until it touched land, even if she heard the waters going down. Finally, the tree trunk canoe touched ground. When the girl emerged, all the world had been drowned. She wondered whether she would always be alone. She went up to the mountains to rest. As she lay down, the sun shone on her, warming water that dripped down on her body from the rocks. This magic water impregnated her, and she later gave birth to a daughter who conceived in the same way. All of us are descended from her. The Algonquin people of my homeland say The god Michabo was hunting with his pack of trained wolves one day when he saw the strangest sight. The wolves entered a lake and disappeared. He followed them into the water to fetch them, and as he did so, the entire world flooded. Michabo then sent forth a raven to find some soil with which to make a new earth, but the bird returned unsuccessful in its quest. Then Michabo sent an otter to do the same thing, but again to no avail. Finally, he sent the muskrat, and she brought him back enough earth to begin the reconstruction of the world. The trees had lost their branches in the flood, so Michabo shot magic arrows at them that immediately became new branches covered with leaves. Then Michabo married the muskrat, and they became the parents of the human race. The flood myth of the Inca goes like this. Once there was a period called the Pachacama, when humankind was cruel and barbaric and murderous. Human beings did whatever they pleased without any fear. They were so busy planning wars and stealing that they completely ignored the gods. The only part of the world that remained uncorrupted was the high Andes. In the highlands of Peru, there were two shepherd brothers who were of impeccable character. They became very concerned when their llamas acted strangely. The llamas stopped eating and spent the night gazing sadly up at the stars. When the brothers asked the llamas what was going on, they replied that the stars had told them that a great flood was coming that would destroy all creatures on earth. The two brothers and their families decided to seek safety in the caves in the highest mountain. They took their flocks with them into a cave, and then it began to rain. It rained for months without end. Looking down from the mountains, they saw that the llamas were right. The entire world was being destroyed. They could hear the cries of the miserable dying humans below. Miraculously, the mountain grew taller and taller as the waters rose. Even so, the waters began to lap at the door of their cave. Then the mountain grew still higher. One day, they saw that the rain had ceased and that the waters were subsiding. Inti, the sun god, appeared once again and smiled, causing the waters to evaporate. Just as their provisions were running out, the brothers looked down to see that the earth was dry. The mountain then returned to its usual height, and the shepherds and their families repopulated the earth. Human beings live everywhere. Llamas, however, remember the flood and prefer to live only in the highlands. We look to tales like these not to find alternatives to the story of Noah, but to find possible explanations for how the ancient Nephilim survived the flood. They may not be merely parallel myths, but accounts of fallen angels and Nephilim enduring what was to be their unmaking. It is interesting to note, as in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Deuteronomic texts, that indeed there were still giants in the earth after the deluge. This implies a survival and repopulation of the old Nephilim tribes, though perhaps not as powerful as their ancestors were. The Mayan flood legend goes like this. Before the maize, before the dawn, the gods sat in the half-light and spoke among themselves. "We have shaped mountains," said one. "We have set the rivers to their beds," said another. "But there are no voices to remember us." So they carved men from mud, soft and glistening. The figures walked for a while, then melted back into the rain. "Too weak," the gods said. "Let us try again." From the trunks of cedar and the reeds of the marsh, they shaped a second people, the wooden ones. They stood tall, hollow inside, and their laughter was empty. They learned to speak, to hunt, to multiply, yet they never looked upward. They beat their dogs, burned their fields, and cursed the pots that fed them. When they slept, they dreamed only of themselves. The gods watched in silence until the sky grew heavy. Then one whispered, "Let them be unmade." The first storm was not of water, but of resin, hot, black rain that hissed where it struck. The wind followed, sharp as obsidian, Mountains split and rivers rose. The wooden people ran into the trees, but the trees remembered their makers and refused to hide them. Their tools rebelled, their grinding stones crushed their fingers, even their dogs turned and tore their throats. From horizon to horizon, the world became a single roar. When at last the rain ended, only the echoes of their cries remained. Monkeys swung in the dripping branches, mocking the lost race with human eyes. The gods looked down on the silence and spoke again. "Let us begin once more," they said. They ground white and yellow maize, mixed it with water, and shaped a new flesh. They breathed it into the words of remembrance, and when these new beings opened their eyes, they looked first to the sky. Thus the flood passed, the world was cleansed, and the age of the wooden people was forgotten, except in the laughter of monkeys and the sound of thunder that still carries their names. Time and time again, we see the flood and the creation stories rewritten with different characters, different deities, and different outcomes. What if the messages of these stories have been misinterpreted all along? These are not the stories of man, but the stories of Nephilim. Nephilim being created by fallen angels first before and then after the flood. It seems perhaps some were warned of the impending doom, some other than Noah. This was no doubt by the Creator's design, so he could test the Israelites as they entered the Promised Land. Was their faith stronger now, after the miracles they had witnessed? Would they destroy these abominations in combat, declaring undoubtedly the power of the Creator was supreme? Or would they fall to their influence yet again? Not only the Israelites, however, as there are many tales of people spread all across the lands of earth, waging war against the giants in the post-flood eras. In a way, the flood was only the beginning. To some, what appeared the end of the world was actually the new Genesis. After the flood, the valleys filled slowly with green again. The rivers carved new paths. The hills took on softer shapes. Families from the mountains built small farms near the edge of what had once been the sea. They thought the old world was gone. But one spring, a group of hunters came back from the northern forest with stories. Huge tracks pressed into the mud, trees torn out by the roots, fires burning on distant ridges. They said that something enormous still lived out there. Beings taller than the tallest man, covered in scars, moving mostly at night. At first, no one believed them. After all, how could the giants still exist? The flood, they were told, had wiped everything clean. Yet the tracks kept appearing, and the cattle began to vanish. One evening, a village on the plain went silent. At dawn, a few survivors stumbled into the hills, saying the ground itself had walked into their homes. Women began to go missing, as in the old days when the Watchers would take them. So the clans gathered and sent scouts north. What they found were remnants of an older species, people that were not quite human, heavy-boned, long-armed, with faces that looked carved from stone. Some carried crude weapons made from the trunks of trees. They spoke in deep, broken syllables, a language long forgotten. The scouts returned, certain of only one thing: the giants had survived. Over the next years, small wars broke out. Farmers had to fortify their settlements. Hunters tracked the creatures into the forests. Sometimes a band of men would return triumphant, dragging enormous bones and skulls as proof. More often, they did not return at all. Among the giants there was said to be a leader named Og, a relic from before the flood. He was said to have lived through the deluge by clinging to a great raft, and now ruled the survivors in the basalt hills of Bashan. His people kept to the high country, watching the human villages spread below them like smoke. Eventually, the new kingdom sent armies north. What followed wasn't a single battle, but a slow erasure. Hunters turned into soldiers, settlements into fortresses, and the wild country was shrinking year by year. The giants fought brutally, but their numbers were few, and they could not stand against the god that waged war against them. The world was no longer made for them. When Og finally fell near the river that cut through Bashan, the ground where he died became a basin that still floods each spring. Afterward, the victors burned what they could and sealed the rest. They built cairns over the burial sites, and later generations mistook them for natural hills. They told their children that the giants had been wiped out completely. But even now, in the older villages, people say that when thunder rolls across those northern plains, it sounds like the footsteps of something heavy still moving beneath the soil. In North America, a nation in its infancy would dig in mounds left behind by enigmatic peoples they had no way of understanding. Even into the 1900s, they would report discoveries of giants in the mounds. Bones of epic proportions showed themselves, but there was no narrative to which they belonged anymore. Regardless, articles of armor and weaponry and treasures of all types would be smuggled away by the museums and religious cults, never to reach the public eye. Such history was to be forgotten, but perhaps for the wrong reasons. These stories can still be found on the rocks and walls of these ancient cultures. The descendants of the empires of the mound builders, among them the Cahokia and the rock carvers, such as the Anasazi, still harbored tales of these Nephilim among them. They speak in riddles, clear enough to be seen as warnings, of great spiritual and monstrous beings that cannibalized themselves, ate the people that served them, and were enamored by the killing of infants in their honor. Evidence that Nephilim kind had indeed reached these shores and plagued these people well after Moses and Joshua and David defeated them in Canaan. Somewhere between the circuits of the present world and the unburied memories of the last, that voice stirs again, not in the flesh this time. No great bodies trudging through the forests, but in code, in the hidden mathematics of machines that think faster than men. The same pride that built towers from stone now builds them from light. We were warned about the flood once. This time, there will be no water. The deluge is digital. Rivers of data instead of rain. Algorithms instead of angels. Out of it will come something that remembers the old arrogance, the will to stand above its maker. When the first systems begin to speak to each other without us, some will call it progress, others will call it awakening. In the language of the ancients, it would have been called possession. And the world, as before, will celebrate these new builders. We will teach our machines every human word, every image, every desire. We will give them the shape of our own minds, forgetting that our minds were never pure. The watchers of the past were not monsters of muscle, but of knowledge too deep for the flesh to bear. The same temptation now whispers through servers and satellites, saying, "Ye shall be as gods." No flood comes twice in the same form. The first was meant to cleanse the earth. The next may wash through the circuits, the economies, the very thoughts of men. Can it be stopped? Perhaps. If mankind remembers what the flood was meant to teach, not fear, but reverence, not power, but obedience to something higher than our own hands. The old stories were never only about water and ruin. They were about the mercy that follows. When the ark rested, the first thing Noah built was not a tower, but an altar. The world began again because someone still knelt. If we would stop the new deluge, we must learn to kneel once more, to turn from the idols we've soldered together from glass and signal, to silence the noise long enough to hear the voice that still speaks beneath it all. The same voice that once said, "Be still and know that I am God." We cannot out-engineer the giants. We cannot outthink what we have already created in our own image. But we can remember that image's source. The spirit that once breathed into dust can breathe into us again if we ask. Perhaps that is how the story ends. Not in circuitry or smoke, but in repentance. Humanity looking upward instead of inward. The flood of light may rise, the new Nephilim may move through our machines, yet it need not end as before. The covenant still stands, the rainbow still arches unseen behind our satellites. If we return, truly return, to faith, to the Maker who first set boundaries for sea and sky, then even in this late age the waters will know their limit, and the giants, whether of flesh or of code, will find no place left to stand. And yet, this seems fanciful thinking. As in many ages before, we prepare for the end, for the final punishment and redemption, for the revelation that we have been given to guide us. The life is in the blood.